Which wildlife species will we need to take with us when it comes to terraforming other planets? Now the tricky bit here is that it's difficult to work this out, but in some respects it's not. And the issue is that we might well make these species extinct before we need to actually start thinking about using them and starting to plan the process. The very start of the process, let's take the planet Mars. It's very, very cold, it needs to be warmed up. Various people have suggested ways to do this. Most of them involve some physical or engineering advancement. The one that has been suggested is to use nuclear weapons to actually heat the atmosphere, but unfortunately I think that could make the planet toxic for humans and animals, which is probably a very bad idea indeed. It's rather like putting a diesel into your cold drink to warm it up. It's going to be a warmer drink perhaps once you set light to it, but it won't be very nice to drink. So that's probably a non-starter. Another approach that I can see is that to warm the atmosphere you'll have to use something like a heater and a chimney, so rather like a very large lighthouse. The heater, of course, wouldn't be fired by fossil fuels because they don't exist on Mars, but it could be powered by nuclear fusion energy. So if we're talking about 500 years' time, that might be possible. So we'd have to deliver a nuclear fusion engine to Mars, and then we'd probably use something like nanotechnology to actually build a tower. So there are a lot of researchers working on nanotechnology. Very small level engineering machines would actually do things like pump and actually assemble themselves into shapes. And these could be used once they've worked out how to self-replicate. So you'd have to find a source of the right mineral or metal, and then you plant the nano-robotic seed in effect on that, and it would build the tower for you and create the structure. And the idea is that the heater at the bottom, the nuclear fusion engine, would suck air in, heat it, and blast it out warm at the top. And the way they'd work is they'd need hydrogen to actually compress and push together to create a helium molecule, a helium atom, which would then let off some energy in the process, and that's where the heat would come from. So you'd have to supply them with hydrogen, and the helium is a non-toxic gas which would basically just float out of the atmosphere. The next process is a case of starting to think about, well, we've got water now on Mars. We have the carbon dioxide has been liberated from the ice caps, so there is liquid water around. So you then need to think, well, what are you going to do next? What life forms do you need next? And probably as the heating takes place, you would need microorganisms that are tolerant of very cold conditions, like bacteria and archaea from the Arctic and the Antarctic. Now there is a danger with climate change and global warming that these will be extinct by the time we need them. So actually it would be a very good idea to freeze some of them now and to keep them in preserved state for 500 years, because we might well need them on Mars at that point. Once we've done that, we need to build soil. So we're going to need more microorganisms, we're going to need lichens, we're going to need invertebrates, insects, springtails, worms, nematodes to actually create the soil, and that's going to take quite a while. When the soil is functioning, then you can start to think about the first plants, and they're likely to be grasses and things that are wind pollinated, so that they don't need bees to pollinate because the bees haven't been introduced yet. So once they've actually started to cover the planet with vegetative life, then you can start thinking beyond that and thinking about plants that will need bees and butterflies to actually pollinate them. And you can start to introduce small, low-growing shrubs and actually start to introduce the butterflies at the same time. So once you've actually got insect life there, you can start to think about taller trees and larger shrubs. And then you can start to think about things that will eat the bees and the butterflies and predate them. And then you're starting to think about birds and possibly mammals as well. So that's the way it would be assembled, layer by layer by layer over the course of hundreds of years. And the very top layer is the predators, of course. You need the predators in the mix to keep the populations healthy. If they're not healthy, then the whole thing could collapse, because they could catch some disease that has been imported by mistake or from another species. So you're going to need the Amur leopards, the Siberian tigers, because they can cope with cold conditions. And you're going to need seabirds that will eat other birds, like skuas and things like that. So it's difficult to tell what species we're going to need, but we can make intelligent guesses now. And if conservationists are trying to think which species do we preserve when we've got limited funds, then it's a case of saying, try to think into the future a bit. Which one is going to be most important to human survival on another planet in 500, 1,000, 10,000 years' time? Got you thinking again. Thanks for listening.